So today we're going to do another season preview, and this time we're going to look at the new boys, Austin FC, and look at how their expansion year is going to look like. Now, before I actually begin to do so, I just want to quickly say that everything on this board is completely truthful, and that there's nothing on this board that is so blatant that you think that this is kind of like an April Fool's joke. And I know since today is April Fools, and that since a lot of people have been doing kind of April Fools type of video, unfortunately I'm not going to be one of those person that's going to do so, unless if I maybe think about doing a news of the future video after this. And that if you don't know what exactly a news of the future video is, well, just go search on my channel, which I think I done one of those video last year when the season was suspended because of the pandemic, and you understand why exactly a news of the future video kind of categorize why it's kind of like an April Fool's type of video. But I'll see if I want to do that or not, and if I don't, then yeah, there's gonna be no April Fool's kind of video that I'm gonna do this year. And that, again, everything on this board is completely truthful, and that to just guarantee to you why exactly it's truthful, I even double check in terms of looking at the current roster for Austin FC to make sure that I have everybody on this roster, and I have every player that is currently in the roster for Austin FC. Now, speaking of which, let's look at this current roster. So in goal, you got Andrew Tarbell, Brad Struver, and Brady Scott. Most likely Andrew Tarbell is going to be the starting goalkeeper for Austin FC, and that this is going to be his second chance of being a starting goalkeeper with a team. Now, I do have some good news and bad news for Austin fans in terms of Andrew Tarbell, because as a Quakes fan, he used to be our starter for a couple of seasons. The good news is, as I mentioned before, whenever a Quakes player leaves to another team or join another team within MLS, they tends to do much better when they play for another team compared to when they are playing for the Quakes. The bad news is there is one exception, and that of course is David Bingham, where I think David Bingham is the only player that I know of that the Quakes have sold to another team in the past couple of seasons that has been even worse than when he was with the Quakes. And the reason why I say that's a bad news is David Bingham is a goalkeeper, so there could be a case where maybe Tarbell could look even worse than he is with the Quakes, and maybe go in that same route that David Bingham unfortunately go with. But at the same time, the other good news is, last year when Tarbell was kind of the backup goalkeeper for Columbus, and actually got more minutes than I thought he would get with Columbus. I thought he was definitely much more decent than he was with the Quakes, which kind of just explains maybe their Tarbell is another one of those players that when he does leave the Quakes to join another team, he tends to do much better than when he was doing his time with the Quakes. So maybe it's more toward the good news part rather than the bad news that I talked about Andrew Tarbell being the starting goalkeeper for Austin FC this season. Now in defense, you got Matt Beasler, Julio Cascante, Hector Jimenez, Freddie Kiltman, Zan Kunimic. Is it Kunimic or Komenich? That is. Again, if I mispronounce some of these names, I do apologize, but as the season goes on, I will definitely do much better in terms of pronouncing these names. Then you got Nick Lima, Johan Romana, and Ben Sweat to round off your defense. Matt Beasler, they of course got him off of a free agency, and a player that I kind of predict that he was going to be picked up by Austin FC, and indeed that of course is the case. Cascante, I think he was picked up by the Timbers off of, or the Austin FC picked him up from the Timbers off of free agency, or the fact that they actually did like kind of a trade, and that Austin FC did give some amount of money to Portland in order to get Cascante. Actually, now that I think of it, I think it's the latter, the fact that Austin did had to send some money to the Timbers in order to get Cascante to this team. And then you got Hector Jimenez, who I believe they picked him up off of free agency with Columbus. Freddie Klintman, one of the picks from the super draft that they got. Zan Komenich, a guy that they of course picked up and got from Slovenia, who used to play for NK Maribor. Nick Lima, obviously we know about how he arrived at Austin FC, and I mentioned in the last season preview where the Quakes surprisingly sold Nick Lima to Austin FC in exchange around 600,000 general allocation money. Johan Romana actually came from the same club as Rodney Redis, which I'll talk about later, and also in some extent Cecilia Dominicus, where all three of them came from a club from Paraguay. I forgot what that club from Paraguay is actually called that all three of these guys come from, but you know, it's notable that they of course got a couple of players from the same team, and it's also the case with the fact that I think Austin have 3 players on this team that used to play for the Quakes. Got Tarbell, Nick Lima, and also, as I'll later mention, Danny Houston in the forward line. And then of course Ben Sweat, of course, getting picked up from Inter Miami, and this will be the second consecutive year that Ben Sweat will be starting his season with an expansion team after he was on that Inter Miami expansion team roster last year. Then in the midfield, you got Sebastian Berhalter, Diego Fagundes, Daniel Pereira, Thomas Pochettino, Alex Rayne, Ulises Segura, and Jared Schramm. Sebastian Berhalter, obviously they picked him up on a trade with Columbus, and this was, I think, the first time we actually saw Austin and Columbus actually decide to trade players in exchange for general allocation money, and I assuming we're probably not going to see a lot of those, knowing the history between both of those clubs. Diego Fagundes, I think they picked him up off of free agency after New England decided not to re-sign him. Daniel Pereira, who is the number 1 overall pick in the Super Draft. Thomas Pochettino, one of their big name DP that they picked up this offseason. Alex Rayne, probably the biggest acquisition we have throughout this offseason with that blockbuster move, which Austin was able to get him from NYCFC in exchange for about $1.5 million general allocation money. Then you got Ulises Segura, who I think they also picked him up off of free agency from DC United, followed by Jared Schramm, which was another player that they picked up. Well, it's a player that they picked up in the expansion draft, and I think he was either the 3rd or 4th overall pick. I think he was a 3rd overall pick in the expansion draft this season. Then you got Cecilia Dominicus, their first ever player that they of course signed all the way back from last year when this team was announced that they were going to be coming into the league this season. John Gallagher, a guy that they of course got from Atlanta United in exchange for a small amount of general allocation money. Danny Houston, I mentioned in the last season preview, he was picked up from Austin FC in the number 1 overall pick in the expansion draft. Then they got also journeyman Kekuta Mane, who continued to chase Kai Kamara's record in terms of the most amount of team a player has played in MLS, and that I think he also is joining free agency from Austin FC, and I actually don't remember who exactly he was joining free agency, and you know, I think you guys can excuse the fact that I'm not quite sure exactly who was his last club, because he's been joining so many clubs that I'm kind of lose track of what club does Kekuta Mane used to play. I think it was New England that he was last with, but I could be completely wrong. Then you got Rodney Redis, who I just mentioned. He of course joined Austin FC with the same club that Johan Romana was from. And I also mentioned earlier with Cecilia Dominicus, you know, he actually was part of Independiente, but he was actually kind of on loan with the same club that Romana and Redis was in, so that's why I kind of mentioned that all 3 of these guys are basically coming from the same Paraguayan club that Austin FC was able to acquire them. And then lastly, they got Aaron Schunfeld, who they of course got off of free agency from Minnesota. Now, the strength of this team, no doubt, I think they got probably the best versatile player in the league in Alex Rayne, and I talk about how this was probably the biggest signing, and probably a signing that is going to be key in terms of this team. I mean, you know, throughout these last couple of expansion teams, especially last year with Nashville SC, I remember when they decided to get Dax McCarty and Walker Zimmerman. I thought those 2 guys are going to be really key to the team, especially in the holding midfield and in the defense. And it seemed like Austin FC kind of saw that, and they thought, you know what, we're going to do kind of something similar to what Nashville did. We're going to get another experienced kind of center back in Matt Beasler, who I know Matt Beasler is not as good as Walker Zimmerman, and he's definitely much older than what Walker Zimmerman is with Nashville, but he's still a very good defender for any team, and I think that is definitely a good pick up for him. And then obviously Alex Rayne, he is a guy that I've already mentioned, probably the best versatile player in the league, and the fact that they were able to acquire him, and even though they pay a huge amount of general allocation money, which to this day I think that's the most expensive amount of general allocation money a team have to pay to another team in exchange for a player, I think it's going to worth every penny, and that he is definitely going to probably be an MVP type of player for this team. The other strength I think with this team is the midfield and back line. When you look at this back line, I think this is a decent looking back line, and that this should be a back line that I'm assuming it's going to kind of look more like that Nashville back line that was very sturdy throughout the entire part of last season. And also in the midfield, I talked about Alex Rayne being the key holder in that midfield, but you also got guys like Diego Fagundes, Daniel Pereira, and even Thomas Pochettino, which I know a lot of people have been saying that not only he is a very decent player, but he could be kind of like that Diego Valeri type of player for Austin FC. And if he can do so, then yeah, this could be a guy that I think a lot of people will watch. And that, I'm not saying that he may be is going to have similar number to what Diego Valeri puts up all throughout all those years with Portland, but if he can kind of put up those similar number, there's no doubt that he could definitely be in running for the newcomer of the year. Now, when you look at some of the weakness of this team, well, I think one of the weakness of this team is that we actually don't know what kind of expansion team Austin will look like in terms of the tactical standpoint. Now, with Josh Wolf, we still don't know exactly how is he going to how exactly his tactics, and also how exactly does he want this team to play. Is he going to want his team to look more like the Nashville SC, or the more like the Gary Smith of Nashville SC, which is kind of a bunker kind of team and trying to take advantage on the attack through counters and also set piece opportunity? Or are they going to maybe trying to be like the team of Atlanta United and LAFC, where they're going to be playing free-flowing soccer through their expansion year? I have no idea. I mean, and the worst thing is that they could maybe even look like the Inter Miami of last year, where Inter Miami last year I had no idea exactly what they were trying to do, and that they just didn't really have an identity throughout the entire part of the season. So yeah, hopefully Austin doesn't fall into that trap, but we shall see throughout the season just to find out what exactly it is Austin FC is going to look like, and what is a Josh Wolf team going to look like for this upcoming season. Now, the other weakness I have with this team is, will they have enough on the attack? Now, I know this sounds like a cliche whenever I talk about expansion team, because this has always been the weakness for the past couple of expansion team. Like when you look at last year with Nashville, that was a big question of, will they have enough on the attack? Especially they didn't really get a lot of attacking players, or any attacking player that you can definitely see that they can produce the goals for this team. Even Inter Miami, even with some of their big signings from the last off season, there was also that question of who exactly is going to score the goals, and who exactly is the number 9. The same case with FC Cincinnati. We don't know exactly who is going to be the guys that's going to score the goal and do enough on the attack. Like the only answer I might have of will they have enough on the attack is maybe, and it depends on if Thomas Pochettino is going to be as good as advertised. Because if Pochettino, along with Fagundes, is going to be that keystone of a player going forward on the attack, and really with Pochettino really kind of pulling the strength on the attack, and also guys like Dominicus and Redis to really be the guy that is gonna be scoring the goals for this team, then no doubt this Austin FC team could be a very decent team on the attack, and that they might have more than enough on the attack for this upcoming season, but we don't know if that is going to be the case. And then lastly, the biggest weakness of this team, and well, actually, this is the biggest weakness of this team, is the number 9 position. Like, there is definitely a lot of question with the number 9 position. I know here on my projected starting 11, I have Danny Houston being as the true number 9, but I won't be surprised throughout this entire season they might be rotating number 9, or that number 9 spot could be a revolving door for Austin FC, because as I mentioned, when they of course picked up Danny Houston from the expansion draft, there is definitely a lot of risk, knowing the fact that Houston during his time with the Quakes, he kind of had a good a couple of decent season in 2017 and also in 2018 when he was really at its peak, but then after that he basically completely went downhill. And that, I know I'm about to throw this cliche again, but maybe this could be a case where maybe he needs like a new change of scenery, and that maybe going to Austin FC might be the team to do so. But still, we don't know if that is going to be the case, and whether or not if he is able to rediscover that good form that he had with the Quakes a couple years ago. And if he isn't able to do so, who else I think could step up? John Gallagher. I mean, Gallagher was okay with Atlanta last year, and he was actually one of their top goal scorers in terms of the attack for that Atlanta team. But is this the guy that you think is going to be the number 9 that's going to score you 10 plus goal? Probably not. And then you got Aaron Schunfeld last year. He was mostly a backup kind of number 9 for Minnesota, and he also kind of struggled to get minutes as the season goes along. So yeah, there is definitely a lot of question in terms of that number 9 position, and that it seemed like most of the guys that they got from that number 9 position are either reclamation project or just guys that kind of fell out of favor with their former team. So yeah, we'll see whether or not if they're going to have an answer in terms of that position. Now, in terms of the projective 11, so as I said with the season preview that I did with the Quakes, the projective 11 I have here is not the same projective 11 that the league actually published an article talk about what is the projective starting 11 on opening day for every single team. For this one, I decided to go with a 4-3-3 formation. Now, I heard that Josh Wolf says that he was maybe thinking about implementing kind of the same formation that Greg Berhalter used, because after all, before Josh Wolf arrived at Austin, he was a longtime assistant of Greg Berhalter, and that people were thinking that he was going to maybe use the same formation that Greg Berhalter used to always use with his crew team. But now I've also heard that he's been saying that he's going to not use that formation as his main choice, and that he might maybe rotate that formation alongside with his preferred formation, which is a 4-3-3, which that's what I have here on the board. So in goal, you got Andrew Tarbell, followed by Ben Sweat, Matt Beaster, Julio Cascante, Nick Lima, Alex Rayne, Pochettino, Pereira, Dominicus, Danny Houston, and Rodney Redness in the starting 11. Now, when you look at these players that is in the 11, there are a couple of guys that you could say that, they might be starter. These might be the starters for opening day, but they might not be guaranteed starter throughout the entire part of the season. I won't be surprised if the center back partnership. I think Beaster probably is going to be a lock-in center back for this team, but in terms of Cascante, he is going to have some competition with Ramon now in terms of that center back pairing. And then in the left back position, Ben Sweat, he's going to have competition from Hector Jimenez in terms of that spot. And then when you look at the midfield, I put Pereira in here, the number 1 overall pick, but I'm assuming a lot of people was thinking that I could put Diego Fagundes in there instead, because he's more of an experienced kind of player. But the only reason why I decided to put Pereira there is that when I look at these past couple of expansion team and look at their opening day roster and their first ever starting 11 in their team history, a lot of those teams usually decide to put their number 1 overall super draft pick in the starting day 11, and I feel like if that is kind of the trend, it's probably going to continue with Austin FC. But don't be surprised if they decide not to do so and just put Fagundes in there instead of Pereira. But along with that, going forward on the attack. You know, as I mentioned with that number 9 position, don't be surprised if Houston, even if he is the number 9 for in the first game for Austin FC, I won't be surprised in these throughout the entire part of the season if Houston is not going to be that main goal scorer that they hope that he could be. There could be definitely a rotation between John Gallagher and Aaron Schunfeld in terms of that spot. And then in the wing area, I think Kakuta Mane is going to really challenge Rodney Redis in terms of that spot in the Y area, but I'm assuming most likely Redis, you know, as long as maybe if Dominicus is going to be in the starting 11, most likely Josh Wolf would put like a winger pairing with Dominicus and Redis, knowing the fact that both of them pretty much used to play for the same club, and both are kind of Paraguayan. So you know, there's that kind of connection to in that, so that so that we can definitely see a case where that is going to be the winger partnership for this Austin FC team. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of this season preview of Austin FC. And again, just like what I said with my last season preview, I'm not going to do a prediction of where they're exactly going to finish, because if I do so, you probably know where I'm going to put them once I do that prediction video, looking at where exactly each team is going to finish in the Western Conference. But I will say this, you know, this team, you know, this is one that I think could potentially compete for playoffs, and that if everything does work out well, and all of their signings and some of the players that they got from the draft turns out to be a hit heading into their expansion year, no doubt this team will definitely make the playoffs out of the Western Conference. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this? And if you're an Austin FC fan, you know, what do you think this expansion season is going to look like? And also, what's your expectation in terms of this year for Austin FC? I mean, you know, the expectation for me for this team isn't really going to be just playoffs, because we know not a lot of expansion team in the past have made it to the playoffs. I mean, that being said, saying that, last year we have both expansion team made it to the playoffs, although you could maybe make the argument that last year, because of the expanded playoffs, we could have maybe only had one of the expanded team made it to the playoffs, and that of course is Nashville SC. But before that, rarely we see teams outside of Atlanta and LAFC, and also Nashville last year and Inter Miami, make it to the playoffs in their first year. But let me know if this might be good enough of a team to make it to the playoffs, and whether or not if that's kind of an expectation that this team could have heading into their inaugural year. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.